The security guard stood there, arms crossed, a smirk spreading across his face as he blocked my path. "Sorry, but you can't enter." Little did he know, I had the deed to this property right in my pocket. What happened next would change everything. So before we dive into this insane story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next on this channel. Also, drop a comment below with property if you've ever dealt with someone trying to stop you from accessing something that's rightfully yours. I never thought I'd find myself in a standoff with a security guard over my own property. The whole situation still feels surreal when I think about it, like something out of those viral videos you see online. Except this time, I was living it. Let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Alex Mitchell, and up until 3 months ago, my life was perfectly ordinary. I worked as a software developer, spent weekends hiking with my golden retriever Max, and had just inherited a commercial property from my late uncle Thomas Baker in Riverside Heights. It was a modest 2-story building on Cedar Street, nestled between Oakwood Plaza and a row of family-owned businesses that had been there for decades. The inheritance came as a surprise. Uncle Thomas and I weren't particularly close, but he had always said I was the only one in the family with business sense. The property wasn't much to look at. Red brick exterior showing its age, windows that had seen better days, and a small parking lot that needed repaving. But it was mine, free and clear, all the paperwork signed and filed with the city. Rachel Cooper, who owned the coffee shop next door, would wave to me every morning when I'd stop by to check on the building. "Your uncle was a good man," she'd say, steam rising from her cup of dark roast. Always talked about how this place would be perfect for a tech startup. She wasn't wrong. The location was prime real estate, just far enough from downtown to avoid the crazy rent prices, but close enough to attract serious businesses. I spent those first few weeks meeting with contractors, getting estimates for renovations and drawing up plans to transform the space into something modern. Emma Roberts, my best friend since college, would join me during lunch breaks, sitting on the front steps with takeout containers while we brainstormed ideas. "This place has so much potential, Alex," she'd say, gesturing with her chopsticks at the large windows. "Just needs some TLC and your tech-savvy touch." The neighborhood had a rhythm to it. Lisa Martinez, who lived in the apartment complex across the street, would walk her Chihuahua every morning at exactly 7:15 a.m. David Chen from the electronics repair shop would prop his door open at 8:10 a.m. sharp, the bell jingling as early customers wandered in. It felt like I was becoming part of something, a community that had been here long before me, but was welcoming me into its fold. I had plans, big plans. The ground floor would be an open concept co-working space, while the upper level would house my own software development company. I even had a name picked out, Mitchell Innovation Hub. Sure, it wasn't the most creative name, but it felt right. The building permits were being processed, and I had already started moving some equipment in, storing it in what would eventually become the main conference room. Everything was falling into place. I had my routine down, stop by Rachel's for coffee, check on the renovation progress, meet with contractors, then head to my current job. Simple, straightforward, normal. The security company that patrolled the street, Westbrook Security, knew me by name. Their usual guard, an older gentleman named Frank, would tip his hat every time I pulled into the parking lot. That all changed the day Marcus Thompson showed up. I remember it clearly. It was a crisp Tuesday morning in October. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting Cedar Street in shades of amber and gold. I had a meeting scheduled with Michael Anderson, the building supervisor, to discuss the electrical upgrades. As I pulled into my usual parking spot, coffee in hand, something felt different. A new security guard stood by the entrance, hands clasped behind his back, watching me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. He was younger than Frank, probably in his early 30s, with broad shoulders and a clean-pressed uniform that looked like it had just come from the dry cleaners. The name tag read M. Thompson. I didn't think much of it at first. New faces weren't unusual in a growing neighborhood like Riverside Heights. I grabbed my laptop bag from the passenger seat, locked my car, and headed toward the entrance like I had done countless times before. That's when he stepped forward, positioning himself directly in front of the door. "I'm sorry, sir, but this is private property. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." I blinked, almost laughing at what I assumed was a joke. "I'm Alex Mitchell. I own this building." I reached for my keys, expecting him to step aside with an apologetic smile. He didn't move. "Sir, I have explicit instructions that no one is to enter this property without proper authorization from Evergreen Properties." My coffee suddenly felt cold in my hand. There must be some mistake. Evergreen Properties, this building belongs to me. I inherited it from Thomas Baker. I have all the paperwork. "I don't make the rules, sir," Thompson interrupted, his voice carrying an edge that set my teeth on edge. "I just enforce them. And right now my instructions are clear. No unauthorized personnel." The morning sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk as other business owners began arriving, some slowing their pace to watch the strange scene unfolding. Rachel stood in her doorway, concern etched across her face as she witnessed our exchange. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my emails for the property deed I had saved. "Look, I can prove—" "Sir," Thompson cut me off again, taking a step closer. "I'm not interested in whatever documents you have on your phone. My orders come directly from management. If you have an issue with that, I suggest you take it up with them. For now, I need you to leave the premises." Heat crept up my neck as I noticed more people watching. David Chen had stopped sweeping. His storefront, Lisa Martinez, held her chihuahua closer, whispering something to another pedestrian. "This is ridiculous," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I was here yesterday. Ask Frank, he knows me. Ask any of these business owners. I've owned this building for months." Thompson's expression remained impassive. "Frank no longer works this route. And as I said, my instructions are clear. Now, are you going to leave voluntarily, or do I need to call the authorities?" Standing there on the sidewalk, my own property looming behind this immovable figure, I felt something shift in the air. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. Something was wrong, very wrong. The property I had spent months planning for, investing in, dreaming about, was suddenly being denied to me by a stranger in a uniform, who acted like he had all the authority in the world. I took a step back, mind racing. This had to be a mistake, a crossed wire somewhere in the system, but the way Thompson watched me, the confident set of his shoulders, the slight curl at the corner of his mouth, it all suggested something else entirely. This wasn't random, this was calculated. That morning marked the beginning of a series of events that would turn my ordinary life upside down, leading me down a path I never expected to travel. But standing there, coffee growing colder by the minute, I had no idea just how deep this rabbit hole would go. The walk back to my car felt like the longest 30 seconds of my life. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled out my phone already. Dialing Emma's number. The morning sun cast long shadows across Cedar Street, and I could feel Marcus Thompson's eyes boring into my back as I retreated. Emma picked up on the third ring. "Alex, aren't you supposed to be in your meeting with the building supervisor?" I slid into my car, watching through the windshield as Thompson resumed his post by the entrance. "Something's wrong. There's a new security guard who won't let me into my own building. He's claiming he has orders from some company called Evergreen Properties." The line went quiet for a moment. That doesn't make any sense. Did you show him the deed? He wouldn't even look at it. I started the engine, more to have the comfort of the air conditioning than any real intention of leaving. He threatened to call the police if I didn't leave. Rachel Cooper emerged from her coffee shop, walking purposefully toward my car. I held up a finger to let her know I was on the phone. "Have you called Sarah Reynolds?" Emma asked, referring to the property manager who had handled the inheritance paperwork. "She should be able to clear this up." "That's my next call." I watched as Thompson shifted his position, tracking Rachel's movement with that same unsettling intensity. Something feels off about this whole thing. The regular guard, Frank, is gone, and this new guy acts like he owns the place. Rachel tapped on my window. I lowered it, the sounds of Cedar Street's morning traffic filtering in. "Alex, what's going on? I just saw what happened. That's not right. You've been here every day for months." "I know, I'm trying to figure it out." I turned back to my phone. "Emma, I'll call you back. I need to get Sarah on the line." After hanging up, I stepped out of the car to talk to Rachel properly. She had her arms crossed, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced with concern. "That new guard showed up about an hour ago."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"Started asking questions about the building, who owned it, who came and went. I told him about you and your uncle, but he just nodded and wrote something in his notebook." A chill ran down my spine despite the morning warmth. "Did he say anything else?" "Just that there had been some changes in property management." Rachel glanced over her shoulder at Thompson, who was now speaking into his radio. "I've been here 15 years, Alex. I've never heard of Evergreen Properties." I pulled up Sarah Reynolds' contact information, my thumb hovering over the call button. "Neither have I, and I've gone through every piece of paperwork related to this building." David Chen approached us, his shop keys jangling in his hand. "Everything okay?" That guard's been watching everyone like a hawk, nearly gave Mrs. Martinez a heart attack when he stopped her from cutting through the parking lot like she always does. I was about to respond when my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Unknown number. I answered, stepping away from Rachel and David. "Hello? Mr. Mitchell?" A woman's voice, unfamiliar and crisp. "This is Jennifer Walsh from Evergreen Properties. I understand there was an incident this morning at the Cedar Street property." My grip tightened on the phone. "Yes, your security guard refused to let me enter my own building. There seems to be some confusion." "There's no confusion, Mr. Mitchell." Her tone was professionally distant. "Our records indicate that ownership of the property at 1247 Cedar Street was transferred to Evergreen Properties 3 days ago. The previous owner, Thomas Baker, had outstanding debts that were called in upon his death. The property was collateral." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "That's impossible. I inherited that building. I have the deed, the paperwork. I suggest you consult with your lawyer, Mr. Mitchell. All the necessary documentation has been filed with the county. Now, I must ask that you refrain from attempting to enter the property again. Our security staff has been instructed to contact law enforcement if necessary." "Wait!" But the line went dead. I stood there, phone still pressed to my ear, trying to process what I'd just heard. Outstanding debts, collateral? None of it made sense. Uncle Thomas had been meticulous about his finances. The inheritance paperwork had been clear. The building was free and clear of any liens or encumbrances. Rachel touched my arm gently. "Alex, what is it?" I lowered the phone slowly, looking up at the building. My building. The morning sun glinted off the windows, the same windows I'd been planning to replace next month. Through them, I could see the equipment I'd already moved in, sitting untouched in what was supposed to become my conference room. "They're saying Uncle Thomas used the building as collateral for some debts, that they've taken ownership." The words felt hollow, unreal. "That's ridiculous," David said, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Your uncle was the most financially responsible person I knew. He paid his coffee tab every Monday like clockwork." I pulled up my email, scanning through months of correspondence with Sarah Reynolds. There had to be something, some warning sign I'd missed. But everything looked normal, right up until 3 days ago when the emails suddenly stopped. Thompson was watching us from his post, that same slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He'd known, I realized. He'd known exactly who I was when I pulled up this morning. My phone buzzed again. Emma. Alex, I just tried calling Sarah Reynolds. Her number's been disconnected. The piece of cold dread that had been forming in my stomach crystallized. What? It says the number is no longer in service. I tried. Her office line, too. Same thing. Rachel and David were still talking, theorizing about what might have happened, but their voices had become distant background noise. My mind was racing, connecting dots I hadn't even known existed. The sudden appearance of Marcus Thompson, the disappearance of Frank, Sarah Reynolds' disconnected numbers, the mysterious evergreen properties emerging out of nowhere with perfectly timed paperwork. Emma, I cut through her concerned questions. I need you to help me with something. Can you access the county records database through your firm's account? Of course. What am I looking for? Everything you can find on evergreen properties and... I paused, watching as Thompson spoke into his radio again, his eyes never leaving our group. I need you to look into any recent filings related to Uncle Thomas's estate. I ended the call and turned to Rachel and David. I need copies of any paperwork you have, lease agreements, property tax statements, anything that mentions this building or Uncle Thomas. Rachel nodded immediately. I have all my lease documents in my office, the original ones signed by your uncle. I've got the property tax assessments from last year, David added. Thomas and I split the cost of appealing when they tried to raise the rates. Get them, please. I glanced at my watch, 9:15 a.m. The county records office would be open. I'm going to head down to the courthouse. Something's not right here. As if on cue, a sleek black SUV pulled into the parking lot. The windows were tinted, but I could make out at least 3 figures inside. Thompson straightened his posture, touching his earpiece. You should go, Rachel said quietly. Whatever's happening here, it's bigger than a simple property dispute. I nodded, already moving toward my car. Through the rearview mirror, I watched as 2 men in expensive suits emerged from the SUV, followed by a woman I assumed was Jennifer Walsh. They moved with the confidence of people used to taking what they wanted. As I pulled away from Cedar Street, my mind was already spinning with questions. Who were these people, really? What did they want with a modest commercial building in Riverside Heights? And most importantly, what had they done to make Sarah Reynolds disappear so completely? The traffic light turned red, and I caught a glimpse of Thompson in my side mirror. He was watching my car, speaking into his radio, that same unsettling smile still playing across his face. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. You need to see this. Found something in the records. Call me ASAP. The light turned green, and I pressed the accelerator, leaving Cedar Street behind. In my gut, I knew I wasn't just dealing with a property dispute anymore. This was something else entirely, something that had been set in motion long before Marcus Thompson showed up at my door. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dashboard, and for the first time, I wondered if Uncle Thomas's death had been as natural as everyone assumed. Because one thing was becoming crystal clear. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to make this look legitimate, and people who went to that much trouble usually had something bigger to hide. I pulled into a parking spot outside the courthouse, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The weight of my laptop bag felt reassuring as I slung it over my shoulder. Everything I needed was in there. Every email, every document, every piece of evidence that this building was rightfully mine. The courthouse loomed above me, its stone facade a testament to permanence and order. but I was beginning to understand that order was just an illusion, easily shattered by people with enough money and motivation. As I climbed the steps, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Emma. "Don't go to the courthouse. Meet me at the hideaway. Now!" I froze, one hand on the heavy wooden door. Emma wasn't prone to dramatics. If she was telling me to stay away, she had a good reason. I turned around, scanning the street behind me. Nothing seemed out of place, but then again, nothing had seemed out of place this morning either. I walked back to my car, trying to appear casual while my heart hammered in my chest. The hideaway was a small coffee shop on the other side of town, far from Cedar Street, far from the courthouse, far from whatever web I was starting to unravel. As I pulled out of the parking lot, a black SUV identical to the one at my building turned into the courthouse entrance. The windows were tinted, but I didn't need to see inside to know who it was. They were following me, and they weren't even trying to be subtle about it. The morning had started with a simple confrontation over access to my building. Now, 3 hours later, I was driving across town to meet Emma, watching my rearview mirror for black SUVs and wondering if my uncle's death wasn't as simple as everyone had believed. The pieces were there, scattered like breadcrumbs, leading to something bigger than a mere property dispute. And Marcus Thompson's knowing smile suggested he was just the tip of the iceberg. I took a series of random turns, making sure I wasn't being followed. The weight of the laptop bag in the passenger seat seemed heavier now, laden with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. But one thing was certain: I wasn't going to let them take what was rightfully mine without a fight. The morning sun had risen fully now, burning away the last traces of fog from the streets, but as I navigated through the city toward the hideaway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was driving deeper into a different kind of fog, one that had been deliberately created to hide something much darker. The hideaway sat nestled between a used bookstore and a vintage record shop, its weathered brick facade making it easy to miss if you didn't know what you were looking for. I parked 2 blocks away, taking a circuitous route on foot, constantly checking over my shoulder. The morning crowd had thinned out, leaving the streets eerily quiet. Emma was already there, tucked into a corner booth with her laptop open and papers spread across the table. Her usual polished appearance was slightly disheveled, and she barely looked up as I slid into the seat across from her. "I need to show you something," she said without preamble, turning her laptop around. "Look at these property records." The screen showed a complex web of corporate filings and property transfers. My eyes caught familiar names: Thomas Baker, Cedar Street, but they were tangled up with unfamiliar entities and holding companies. "Evergreen Properties doesn't exist," Emma said quietly, her voice barely audible over the coffee shop's ambient noise. "At least, not in any real sense. It's a shell company created 3 weeks ago, but here's where it gets interesting." She pointed to a series of dates and transactions. "They filed paperwork showing your uncle used the building as collateral for a loan 6 months ago." "That's impossible," I protested, but Emma held up a hand. "I know, look at the signature." She pulled out a printed document, placing it next to an old lease agreement I had from Uncle Thomas. The signatures were similar, very similar, but not identical. "They forged his signature," I breathed, the implications hitting me like a physical blow. "It gets worse." Emma pulled up another document. "The loan was for $2 million. Your uncle supposedly took it out a week before he died." The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too exposed. I scanned the street through the window, half expecting to see Marcus Thompson's smirking face watching us. "But why?" I asked, turning back to Emma. "The building's worth maybe half that. Why create such an obvious fraud?" Emma's expression was grim. "Because it's not about the building, Alex. Look at this." She pulled up a map of Cedar Street and the surrounding area. Red dots marked properties that had recently changed hands. In the past 6 months, Different shell companies have acquired 17 properties in a 4-block radius, all using similar methods: sudden claims of debt, forged documents, mysterious new management companies. My mind raced back to the changes I'd noticed, but dismissed. The vintage clothing store that suddenly closed last month. The family-owned restaurant that relocated after 30 years. The apartment building that emptied out almost overnight. They're buying up the whole neighborhood, I said slowly. But why go through all this trouble? Why not just make legitimate offers? Emma leaned forward, her voice dropping even lower. Because of what's underneath it. She pulled out another map, this one showing underground utility lines and geological surveys. 3 days ago, the city council had a closed-door meeting about rezoning the entire area. The public records aren't available yet, but my friend in the planning department slipped me this. She pointed to a series of markings that meant nothing to me. They found rare earth elements during a routine geological survey. The kind used in high-tech manufacturing, the kind worth billions. The pieces started falling into place. The sudden interest in a quiet commercial district, the elaborate scheme to acquire properties, the aggressive tactics. They need all the properties, I said, understanding dawning. If even one owner holds out. They can't mine underneath without consent from all property owners, Emma confirmed. And they needed to move fast before word got out and prices skyrocketed. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. Men in suits going through your building, moving out your equipment. They're clearing out my stuff, I said, showing Emma the message. They're not even waiting for the dust to settle. Emma started gathering her papers. We need to move. I don't think I was followed, but we can't. Be too careful. These people, they're not just random fraudsters. The shell companies all trace back to subsidiaries of global resource acquisitions. My blood ran cold. GRA was one of the largest mining conglomerates in the world, known for aggressive takeovers and questionable ethics. What about Sarah Reynolds? I asked, remembering the disconnected phone numbers. Emma's expression darkened. That's what really worries me. She's gone. Not just her phone numbers, everything, her social media, her professional listings, even her address. It's like she never existed. A barista dropped a cup in the kitchen, the crash making us both jump. Through the window, I noticed a black SUV rolling past, moving too slowly to be casual traffic. We need to go, Emma said, already packing her laptop. Separately, I'll head to my office and start digitizing all of this. Don't go home. They'll be watching your place. Where am I supposed to go? I have a friend who runs a motel outside the city. Cash only, no questions asked. I'll text you the address. She paused, her hand on my arm. Alex, these people, they're not going to stop. The mineral rights under that neighborhood are worth billions. Your building is just one piece of their puzzle. I thought about Uncle Thomas, about his sudden heart attack that everyone had attributed to age and stress. Do you think they... Emma's silence was answer enough. Be careful. Don't use your credit cards. Don't call anyone except me, and only from a secure line. She pulled out a burner phone and handed it to me. I'll contact Rachel and David. Let them know what's happening. They need to be careful too. We left the hideaway separately, Emma heading east while I walked west, taking random turns and doubling back several times before returning to my car. The morning had taken on a surreal quality, the ordinary streets of my hometown suddenly feeling alien and threatening. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Rachel. More suits arrived. They're changing the locks. Thompson's watching me through the window. I started the car, my mind racing through options. I had copies of all the documentation proving my ownership. I had evidence of the forged signatures. I had Emma's research showing the pattern of fraudulent acquisitions. But going to the police felt futile. A corporation like GRA would have layers of lawyers and endless resources to drag out any legal battle. The burner phone Emma gave me chirped. An address appeared on the screen. The Safe Harbor Motel, 40 minutes outside the city. As I pulled onto the highway, I noticed a familiar black SUV merging into traffic, several cars behind me. They weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. This wasn't just about acquiring property. This was about sending a message. They wanted me to know they were watching. They wanted me to feel powerless. I took the next exit, then another, weaving through residential neighborhoods and strip malls. The SUV stayed with me, maintaining a consistent distance. These weren't amateur security guards. These were professionals. My regular phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered on speaker. Mr. Mitchell. Jennifer Walsh's voice was as crisp and professional as before. I hope you've had time to reconsider your position. You mean time to accept that you've stolen my property using forged documents? A small laugh. Stolen is such an ugly word. We're business people, Mr. Mitchell. We see opportunities and we take them. The smart play here is to walk away. Sign the transfer papers, and we'll make sure you're compensated generously for your cooperation. And if I don't, then things become complicated. Ask yourself, is one building worth risking everything for? Your career, your reputation. She paused meaningfully. Your safety? I thought about Sarah Reynolds, vanished without a trace. About Uncle Thomas's convenient heart attack. About Marcus Thompson's knowing smile. You can't intimidate everyone, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. People will notice what's happening. People notice what we want them to notice. Mr. Mitchell, by this time next week, Cedar Street will be just another business district going through natural changes. Progress is inevitable. The only question is whether you want to be on the right side of it. I ended the call, my hands shaking slightly. Through the rearview mirror, I could see the black SUV still following, its tinted windows revealing nothing about its occupants. The burner phone chirped again, another message from Emma. Found something big. Don't trust anyone in city planning. Meeting tonight. Stay safe. I merged onto another highway, heading in the opposite direction from the motel address Emma had sent. The SUV followed. Good. Let them chase me around the city while Emma dug deeper. Let them think they had me running scared. Because one thing was becoming crystal clear. This wasn't just about my building anymore. This was about an entire community being systematically dismantled by corporate greed. Uncle Thomas's death, Sarah Reynolds's disappearance, the forged documents. They were all part of a bigger picture, one that had been carefully hidden until now. The morning sun had risen high in the sky, casting harsh shadows across the dashboard. In just a few hours, my life had transformed from a simple property dispute into something that felt more like a corporate thriller. But this wasn't fiction. This was happening in real time, to real people in my own hometown. As I drove, watching the black SUV maintain its steady distance, I made a decision. They wanted to intimidate me. Fine. They wanted to play hardball. I could play too, because sometimes the biggest mistake powerful people make is assuming that ordinary citizens will just roll over and accept defeat. The burner phone chirped one more time, an image from Emma. It was a document, partially redacted, but one line stood out clearly. Project Echo, Phase 1 completion required before geological survey becomes public record. They were working on a deadline. That's why they were being so aggressive, so obvious. They needed every property secured before the mineral rights discovery became public knowledge, which meant I had something they didn't. Time. I turned onto a side street, then another, watching as the black SUV struggled to maintain its tail through the tight residential roads. They thought they were hunting me, but in reality, they were. showing me exactly how worried they were. Let them follow, let them think they had the upper hand, because while they were watching me, they couldn't watch everyone. And somewhere in this web of shell companies and forged documents, there was a weak link. We just had to find it before they realized what we were doing. The game was on, and this time I wasn't playing by their rules. The Safe Harbor Motel lived up to its name in appearance only. Paint peeled from the wooden siding and the neon. A vacancy sign flickered intermittently in the growing dusk, perfect for someone who needed to disappear. I pulled into the far corner of the parking lot, killing the engine but leaving the key in the ignition. The black SUV that had been tailing me all day was nowhere in sight. I'd finally lost them somewhere along the maze of back roads leading out of the city. The motel office smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap air freshener. A weathered man with grey stubble barely looked up from his newspaper as I slid cash across the counter. No questions, no paperwork, just a key with a plastic tag marked 23. The room was exactly what you'd expect. Musty carpet, faded wallpaper, a bed that had seen better decades. But right now, it felt like a fortress. I pulled the heavy curtains shut, double-checked the locks, and finally allowed myself to breathe. The burner phone Emma gave me chirped. Meeting set. Midnight. Oakwood Industrial Park, Building 7. Found. The smoking gun. My hands trembled slightly as I typed a response. The last time Emma had seemed this urgent about something, she'd uncovered evidence of judicial corruption that made national headlines. If she was right about this. A soft knock at the door made me freeze. 3 quick taps, then 2 slow. Emma's old signal from our college days. I opened the door to find Rachel Cooper standing there, looking as out of place as a rose in a garbage dump. "They're watching my shop," she said, stepping inside. 2 men in suits spent the afternoon taking pictures of everyone who came in. Thompson's got people posted at every entrance to Cedar Street. I secured the door behind her, checking the parking lot through a gap in the curtains. "How did you find me?" "Emma told me. She said you'd need this." Rachel pulled a thick manila envelope from her bag. "Every piece of correspondence I ever had with your uncle. Lease agreements, maintenance requests, property tax records, everything." The envelope felt heavy with potential evidence. "Thank you, but you shouldn't have risked." "They're trying to force me out too," Rachel cut in, her voice tight. "This morning after you left, a woman from Evergreen Properties showed up with paperwork claiming my lease isn't valid. They're giving me 48 hours to vacate." My stomach clenched. "They can't do that. Your lease is ironclad." They seemed to think otherwise. Rachel's hands were steady as she pulled out her phone, showing me a series of photos. "They've been moving equipment into the basement of your building all day. Heavy stuff, industrial, grade." David tried to get a closer look, but Thompson's people threatened to have him arrested for trespassing. I studied the images, large crates being unloaded from unmarked trucks, men in hard hats carrying sophisticated-looking equipment. They're not waiting for the rezoning approval. They're starting their survey work now. There's more. Rachel's voice dropped lower. "Mrs. Martinez, you know, the lady with the chihuahua? She said she saw Sarah Reynolds 3 days ago, getting into a black SUV outside her apartment. She was arguing with someone, but Mrs. Martinez couldn't hear what they were saying. That was the last time anyone saw her." The implication hung, heavy in the air. These people weren't just pushing papers and making threats, they were making people disappear. A car door slammed somewhere outside. We both tensed, but the footsteps passed by without pausing. "Emma's found something," I said, keeping my voice low. "Something big enough that she won't discuss it over the phone. We're meeting at midnight." Rachel's expression tightened. "Be careful. David followed one of their trucks this afternoon. It led him to a warehouse owned by Global Resource Acquisitions. These aren't just property developers, they're one of the biggest mining companies in the world." I know. I hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at me. Rachel, did my uncle ever mention anything about geological surveys? Any strange visitors or unusual questions about the property? She frowned, thinking, not directly, but about a month before he died, he was acting different. Paranoid, almost. He installed new locks on the basement door, started checking his mail immediately instead of letting it pile up like he usually did. She paused, and there was a night, maybe 2 weeks before. I was closing up late and I saw him arguing with someone in the parking lot. A man in an expensive suit. Your uncle was upset. I'd never seen him like that before. Did you hear what they were arguing about? No, but afterward, your uncle sat in his car for almost an hour, just staring at nothing. The next day, he asked me to witness him signing some papers. Said it was just routine property stuff, but his hands were shaking. The pieces were starting to form a clearer picture. Uncle Thomas had known something big enough to get him killed. And now the same people were systematically erasing every trace of their activities, using forged documents and threats to clear out an entire neighborhood before anyone could connect the dots. The burner phone chirped again. Emma. Change of plans. Need to meet now. Emergency. A chill ran down my spine. Emma never changed plans last minute unless something was very wrong. I have to go, I said, already grabbing my jacket. You should stay here. It's not safe. Like hell, Rachel interrupted. I've known your uncle for 15 years. If someone murdered him over this, I want to know why. I hesitated, but the determination in her eyes was unmistakable. Fine, but we do this carefully. No phones, except the burner. Stay at least a block behind me at all times. If anything feels wrong, I know how to handle myself, Rachel said, a hardness in her voice I'd never heard before. I grew up in Chicago's South Side. This isn't my first time dealing with people who think money puts them above the law. We left the motel separately, Rachel taking her car while I walked to a nearby diner and called a taxi. The sun had set completely now, leaving the industrial park shrouded in shadows, perfect for a clandestine meeting or an ambush. The taxi dropped me 2 blocks from Building 7. I circled the area twice, looking for signs of surveillance. The black SUVs that had been so obvious earlier were nowhere in sight. That worried me more than if they'd been parked right out front. Rachel's text came through on the burner, all clear from the south. No movement. Building 7 loomed ahead, its abandoned windows dark except for a faint light on the 2nd floor. Emma's signal. I picked my way through the empty parking lot, staying close to the shadows. The side door was unlocked, just as she'd said it would be. The interior smelled of dust and disuse. My footsteps echoed slightly, despite my attempt to move quietly. The stairs creaked under my weight as I made my way up, every sense straining for signs of danger. The light was coming from an old office at the end of the hall. The door was ajar, spilling a thin line of fluorescent brightness across the worn carpet. I approached carefully, listening for voices or movement. Emma? No response. My pulse quickened as I pushed the door open wider. A laptop sat on a makeshift desk of old crates, its screen showing a complex diagram of underground mineral deposits. Papers were scattered across the floor, and a coffee cup had been knocked over, its contents still wet. She had been here, recently, but something had gone wrong. A folded note sat propped against the laptop, my name written in Emma's hurried scrawl. Inside 3 words, USB 3rd floorboard. The sound of a car engine starting somewhere outside made me jump. Through the grimy window, I caught a glimpse of taillights disappearing around the corner of the building. I dropped to my knees, running my hands over the floorboards. The 3rd one from the wall was loose, just as Emma had indicated. Underneath, wrapped in a plastic bag, was a USB drive and another note. Trust no one, especially not the police. Everything you need is here. Footsteps echoed from the stairwell, heavy, purposeful steps. Not Emma's, not Rachel's. I grabbed the USB drive and notes, shoving them into my pocket as I looked frantically for another exit. The window was too high, the drop too dangerous. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied now by the soft crackle of a radio. "Check every room," a familiar voice commanded. Marcus Thompson. "They're here somewhere." I pressed myself against the wall beside the door, heart hammering. Options raced through my mind. Fight, run, hide. The footsteps were in the hallway. Now, moving methodically from room to room, a soft buzz from my pocket. The burner phone. "Rachel, 3 black SUVs outside. Armed men. Get out now." But how? I was trapped, cornered like a rat in an abandoned building while professional security forces closed in. The USB drive felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. Whatever Emma had found, it was big enough to bring armed men hunting through an abandoned industrial park at night. The footsteps paused outside the door. A beam of light swept across the floor as someone checked the room with a flashlight. I held my breath, pressing harder against the wall, praying the door would hide me for just a few more seconds. "Sir?" A new voice called from somewhere down the hall. "We found something." The footsteps moved away. I allowed myself to breathe again, my mind racing. I needed a distraction, something to give me a chance to slip past them. The laptop still sat on the crates, its screen glowing with damning evidence. Perfect. I moved quickly, quietly, gathering the scattered papers into a pile. Then, taking a deep breath, I kicked the crates as hard as I could. The laptop crashed to the floor with a satisfying crunch of breaking electronics. Shouts and running footsteps immediately responded to the noise. I was already moving, slipping out the door and heading the opposite direction from the approaching security team. The hallway stretched endlessly ahead, doors lining both sides. I needed a way down, a way out, a way... There. A maintenance ladder, partially hidden behind an old filing cabinet. It had to lead somewhere. The shouts were getting closer. They'd discovered the broken laptop, realized it was a distraction. I yanked the ladder access open and began climbing down, trying to move as quietly as possible while still maintaining speed. The shaft was pitch black, the rungs slick with decades of grime. I lost count of how far I'd descended when my foot finally found solid ground. A maintenance tunnel, barely tall enough to stand in, stretched into darkness in both directions. More shouts from above, flashlight beams stabbing down through the access hatch. I picked a direction at random and ran, one hand trailing along the damp wall for guidance. The tunnel seemed endless, branching and turning like a concrete maze. I lost all sense of direction, simply running away from the sounds of pursuit. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I couldn't stop. Finally, mercifully, a glimmer of light. Ahead, a storm drain, opening onto a deserted street I didn't recognize. I squeezed through the narrow gap, emerging into the cool night air like a diver breaking the surface. The burner phone buzzed again. Rachel. Emma's car found abandoned at city limits, signs of struggle. My blood ran cold. They had her. And judging by the armed response at the industrial park, they knew exactly what she had discovered. I leaned against a wall, trying to catch my breath and think. The USB drive felt heavy in my pocket, probably the only copy of whatever Emma had found, the evidence she thought was worth risking everything for. A black SUV rolled past the end of the street, moving slowly. They were widening their search pattern. Soon they'd find me, unless... I pulled out the burner phone one last time. "Rachel, meet me at the place where it all started. 1 hour. Bring David." It was time to stop running. Time to find out exactly what was on this USB drive. Time to understand why a multinational corporation was willing to kill people over a few blocks of Cedar Street. The night was still young, and somewhere in this city, Emma needed help. But first, we needed to know what we were really up against. I pushed off from the wall and started Walking, staying in the shadows, my mind racing with possibilities. Whatever Emma had found, it had better be worth all this. Because now, we weren't just fighting for a building. We were fighting for our lives. The place where it all started wasn't my building. It was Rachel's coffee shop. The basement held a secret few people knew about. A small office where Uncle Thomas used to work late into the night, accessible only through a hidden door behind the storage shelves. Rachel was already there when I arrived, David Chen at her side. The shop's windows were dark, but a faint light leaked from beneath the basement door. I knocked our old pattern, 2 slow, 3 quick, and heard the deadbolt slide back. "Quick," Rachel whispered, ushering me inside. "Thompson's men drive by every 20 minutes. The basement office looked exactly as Uncle Thomas had left it. Stacks of paperwork lined the walls. An ancient desktop computer hummed in the corner, and a corkboard covered in maps and notes dominated one wall. The air smelled of coffee and old books, comforting scents that felt surreal given our current situation. David had already set up his laptop on the cluttered desk. "If there's anything recoverable on that USB drive, we'll find it." His day. Job might have been electronics repair, but his real expertise lay in data recovery and digital forensics. My hands shook slightly as I handed over the drive. The weight of what it might contain, what Emma might have sacrificed to get it to us, felt crushing. "First, we need to make sure it's clean," David muttered, connecting the drive to a specialized device rather than directly to his computer. Corporate espionage types love to booby-trap their data. Rachel paced the small space, her normally calm demeanor fractured by worry. "We need to call the police about Emma." "And tell them what?" I asked. "That she disappeared while investigating a multinational corporation's illegal mining operation. That we broke into an abandoned building and stole corporate data. They'll laugh us out of the station if they're not already on GRA's payroll." David's device beeped. "Drive's clean, but encrypted. Give me a few minutes." While David worked, I studied Uncle Thomas's corkboard. Most of the documents were mundane: property assessments, utility bills, maintenance schedules. But in the corner, partially hidden behind a takeout menu, was something that made my heart skip. A geological survey map dated 6 months ago. "Rachel," I called softly, "when did you say Uncle Thomas started acting strange?" She thought for a moment. "About 5 months ago, right after he had that argument in the parking lot." I pulled the map free, careful not to tear it. The markings were technical, meaningless to my untrained eye, but there were notes in Uncle Thomas's handwriting scrawled in the margins. One phrase jumped out. "They know. Offer incoming. Must protect others." "Got it," David announced. The laptop screen flickered to life, displaying folders of encrypted files. Emma was thorough. These are corporate documents, internal emails, geological surveys. Holy shit. We crowded around the screen as David opened a video file. The footage was grainy, shot from what appeared to be a hidden camera. A conference room. Executives in expensive suits, presentations on the wall. "Project Echo is proceeding ahead of schedule," a man was saying. "The mineral deposits extend further than initially estimated. Conservative projections value the site at $12 billion. Another voice, female. "What about the holdouts?" "Being handled." Baker was unfortunate, but necessary. His niece's inheritance complicated things, but we have contingencies in place. My blood ran cold. They were talking about Uncle Thomas's death, about me. "The important thing," the man continued, "is keeping this quiet until we secure the remaining properties. If word gets out about the rare earth deposits before we have everything locked down, the whole project is compromised. The Chinese are already sniffing around." David opened another file, internal emails discussing containment strategies and asset acquisition. The clinical language couldn't disguise their true meaning. They were systematically destroying lives to get what they wanted. "Wait," Rachel said suddenly. "Go back to that email about property acquisitions." David scrolled back. The email contained a list of target properties and their owners. Next to each name was a status: secured, in progress, or resistant. My building was listed as in progress. But what caught my attention was the name next to Rachel's coffee shop: priority target, underground access point. "Your basement," I breathed. "They're not just after the buildings. They need your basement specifically." "Why?" Rachel's face had gone pale. "The tunnel." "What tunnel?" She moved to a filing cabinet, pulling out rolled blueprints. "Your uncle showed me once. During Prohibition, this whole block was connected by underground tunnels. Smugglers used them to move liquor. Most were filled in decades ago, but the one under my shop, it's still intact, runs all the way to the river. The implications hit me like a thunderbolt. They need a way to move equipment and materials without being noticed. The tunnel network would let them start mining operations before the rezoning is even approved. "And Emma figured it out," David added quietly. "That's why they grabbed her. She got too close to the truth." The burner phone buzzed, an unknown number. My thumb hovered over the answer button. "Put it on speaker," Rachel whispered. I did. For a moment, there was only static. Then, "Hello, Alex?" Emma's voice, strained but steady. "I'm supposed to tell you to back off, to hand over the USB drive, and forget everything you've learned. Emma, are you—" "I'm fine, but you need to listen carefully." Her voice took on an odd rhythm, like she was reading from a script. "They're willing to be generous. $2 million, plus relocation, expenses. All you have to do is sign over the property and walk away. No questions asked." I noticed Rachel scribbling frantically on a notepad. She held it up. "She's tapping Morse code on something." David pulled up a Morse code translator on his phone, listening intently as Emma continued her rehearsed speech. After a moment he wrote, "Don't trust police. Proof in tunnel, midnight." "You have 1 hour to decide," Emma concluded. "Choose wisely." The line went dead. We stared at each other in the dim basement light. 1 hour to figure out what proof Emma had hidden in the tunnel network. 1 hour to find a way past Thompson's security. 1 hour to decide if we were really ready to take on a multinational corporation with unlimited resources. "We need help," Rachel said finally. "Someone with real authority who can't be bought." "I might know someone," David offered. "My cousin works for the EPA's Criminal Investigation Division. If we can prove Giray is planning unauthorized mining operations in an urban area." "First we need to find whatever Emma hid," I said. "Rachel, how well do you know these tunnels?" She spread out the blueprints. "Well enough. There are 3 main branches, all connecting under Cedar Street. Most access points are sealed, but the entrance in my basement is still accessible. We'd need to—" A sound from upstairs made us all freeze. Footsteps moving across the coffee shop floor. Rachel moved silently to the security camera feed she'd installed after the first break-in attempt. The screen showed 3 figures moving through the darkness above us, flashlight beams sweeping methodically across the space. "Thompson," I whispered, recognizing his distinctive silhouette. "There's another way out," Rachel breathed, pointing to a section of the blueprint. "Maintenance shaft leads to the alley behind the bookstore." We moved quickly, gathering the most important documents and the USB drive. David wiped his laptop, leaving no trace of the encrypted files. Rachel led us to what looked like an ordinary storage closet, pressed something under a shelf, and a hidden panel swung open. The maintenance shaft was narrow, barely wide enough to shimmy through. We could hear muffled voices above as Thompson's team searched the coffee shop, getting closer to the basement door. "They'll find the office," Rachel whispered as we emerged. "Into the alley. Let them, I replied. They're looking for the USB drive and the blueprints. We have both. And in less than an hour, we'll have whatever proof Emma hid in those tunnels. David checked his phone. My cousin can be here in 2 hours with a federal warrant, but she'll need concrete evidence of environmental violations or criminal conspiracy. Then let's get her some. I turned to Rachel. You know these tunnels best. Where would Emma hide something if she wanted it to be found by friends but not enemies? Rachel studied the blueprint, now illuminated by streetlight. There's a maintenance room near the river junction. Used to be a speakeasy during Prohibition. False walls, hidden compartments, perfect for stashing evidence. Overhead, clouds drifted across the moon, plunging the alley into deeper shadow. Somewhere in the maze of tunnels beneath our feet, Emma had hidden something explosive enough to bring down global resource acquisitions. We just had to find it before they found us. David's phone buzzed. A text from his cousin. Don't do anything stupid. On my way with backup, these people play for keeps. They certainly did. Uncle Thomas's death, Emma's kidnapping, the systematic destruction of an entire neighborhood. All for mineral deposits that no one was supposed to know existed. Rachel folded the blueprints carefully. We should split up. They're watching. All the obvious entry points, but there's a maintenance grate behind the old theater that might still be accessible. Too risky, I argued. We stay together. If they catch any of us alone. A black SUV rolled past the alley entrance, moving slowly. We pressed ourselves deeper into the shadows, hardly daring to breathe. The vehicle paused, then continued. On. They're tightening the net, David whispered. Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it now. He was right. Every minute we delayed gave Gray more time to find whatever Emma had hidden. More time to destroy evidence. More time to make people disappear. I looked at Rachel and David. My friends, my neighbors, people who had chosen to risk everything because it was the right thing to do. Okay, show us how to get into those tunnels. It's time to find out exactly what Uncle Thomas and Emma discovered that was worth killing for. The night pressed in around us as we moved through back alleys and service corridors, following Rachel's lead. Above ground, Thompson's men patrolled in their black SUVs, hunting for us. But below ground, in the century-old smuggling tunnels, we had the advantage. They thought they were facing a small group of helpless citizens. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The maintenance grate behind the old theater hadn't been opened in decades. Rust had sealed the edges, making every attempt to lift it sound like a scream in the quiet alley. Making every attempt to lift it sound like a scream in the quiet alley. David and I strained against the metal while Rachel kept watch. The burner phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. A soft click echoed through the alley as the grate finally gave way. The opening revealed a narrow shaft descending into darkness, the bottom lost in shadow. The musty smell of age and abandonment wafted up, carrying hints of river water and decay. Ladies first, Rachel muttered, already climbing down the metal rungs embedded in the concrete wall. Her small flashlight beam bounced off the curved walls, creating dancing shadows that seemed to move with minds of their own. David went next, his laptop bag held tight against his chest. I followed last, pulling the grate closed above us. The darkness was immediate and absolute, broken only by our 3 small beams of light. The tunnel stretched before us, its brick walls slick with moisture. Rachel consulted the blueprints, now marked with her own annotations. The speakeasy room should be about 400 yards ahead, near the junction with the main tunnel. We moved carefully, our footsteps echoing despite our best efforts at stealth. The air grew thicker as we descended deeper into the tunnel network, heavy with decades of secrets. "Stop," David whispered suddenly. "Listen." We froze. At first I heard nothing but the soft drip of water and our own breathing. Then, distant but distinct, the sound of machinery. "They're already down here," Rachel breathed. "They must have found another entrance." The sound was coming from somewhere ahead of us, in the direction we needed to go. We pressed on, moving slower now, hyper-aware of every echo and shadow. The tunnel branched, one path continuing straight while another curved away to the left. Rachel checked her blueprints again, holding them close to her flashlight. The speakeasy is down the left branch, but she didn't need to finish. The mechanical sounds were coming from that direction too. How many ways into that room? I asked. 2. The main entrance from this tunnel and a hidden door that used to be an escape route. It comes out. She traced a line on the blueprint, behind the bar area. David was already pulling equipment from his bag, small devices that looked like oversized watches. Emergency beacons, he explained, handing one to each of us. Press the button 3 times and it sends a GPS signal to my cousin, if anything goes wrong. We strapped them on without discussion. The weight felt reassuring against my wrist, a thin lifeline to the outside world. The mechanical sounds grew louder as we approached the junction where the speakeasy room should be. Light spilled around the corner, not flashlights but proper industrial lighting. Rachel motioned us back into the shadows, then crept forward to peek around the bend. She returned moments later, her face pale in the dim light. "They're setting up drilling equipment," she whispered. "At least 6 men in there. They're taking core samples from the walls." "Testing mineral content," David added. "They're not waiting for permits or approvals. They're starting their survey work now." I checked my watch. 40 minutes until Emma's deadline. The hidden entrance, how far? Rachel pointed back the way we'd come. "There's a maintenance shaft that connects to it, but we'd have to backtrack almost to the theater." The sound of voices echoed down the tunnel, getting closer. We pressed ourselves against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. "The initial samples are promising," a man was saying. "The concentration is even higher than the surface surveys suggested." "Thompson wants the whole network mapped by morning," another voice replied. "He's convinced the lawyer hid something down here." They passed our hiding spot without noticing us, heading toward the tunnel entrance. As soon as their footsteps faded, Rachel grabbed my arm. "We need to move. They'll have more people coming." We backtracked quickly, finding the maintenance shaft Rachel had mentioned. It was narrower than the main tunnel, forcing us to move single file. The air here was staler, undisturbed by the ventilation systems GRA had obviously installed in the main tunnels. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Rachel stopped. Her flashlight beam revealed a section of wall that looked slightly different from the rest. Newer bricks, laid with less skill than the original construction. "The speakeasy's escape route," she explained, running her hands over the surface. "There should be there." A brick moved under her touch, then another. A narrow opening appeared, barely wide enough to squeeze through. The room beyond was like stepping back in time. The remains of the old bar still stood against one wall, its wood rotted but recognizable. Broken bottles littered the floor, their glass dulled by decades of dust. And on the far wall, hidden behind what had once been a mirror, was a modern safe. "That wasn't here a month ago," Rachel said quietly. "Your uncle must have installed it." David was already examining the safe's electronic keypad. High-end model, not impossible to crack, but it'll take time we don't have. I studied the keypad, thinking about Uncle Thomas. He would have chosen a code that meant something that connected to all of this. "Rachel," I said slowly, "when did your lease agreement with Uncle Thomas start?" She thought for a moment. "July 15th, 2019. Why?" "Because that's the day he told me he'd finally found someone who understood the importance of preserving the neighborhood's history." I punched in the date, 07152019. The safe clicked open. Inside was a single USB drive and a handwritten letter. I recognized Uncle Thomas's distinctive scrawl immediately. "If you're reading this, I failed to protect what matters most, The evidence on this drive proves what Global Resource Acquisitions is really planning. Not just mining, but something far worse. The mineral deposits under Cedar Street are just the beginning. Their real goal is... The letter ended abruptly, torn off mid-sentence, but the USB drive was intact. David immediately connected it to his laptop, his fingers flying over the keyboard. It's encrypted, but wait. These files, they're massive. Geological surveys, environmental impact studies, internal memos. This goes back years. Rachel was keeping watch at the hidden entrance while I looked over David's shoulder. The documents showed a pattern far bigger than we'd imagined. Cedar Street wasn't unique. GRA had been doing this across the country, buying up historic neighborhoods through shell companies, using forged documents and strong-arm tactics to force out residents. "Look at this," David said, opening another file. "They're not just after the rare earth elements. The deposits here are part of a larger geological formation. If they start mining operations, the whole neighborhood could collapse." A voice finished from the doorway. We spun around. Emma stood there, flanked by two men in suits. Her face was bruised, but her eyes were clear and focused. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "They followed me." Marcus Thompson stepped into view behind her, that familiar smirk playing across his face. "Mr. Mitchell, I had a feeling we'd find you down here." More men filed into the room, blocking both exits. The drilling sounds from earlier had stopped, leaving an oppressive silence broken only by the soft drip of water. "I have to admit, you've been more resourceful than we expected," Thompson continued, moving further into the room. "But now it's time to be reasonable. The USB drive, please." I glanced at David's laptop screen, still displaying the damning evidence. One of Thompson's men followed my gaze and started forward. But David was faster. His finger hit a key, and the screen went dark. "Too late," David said calmly. "It's already uploaded to secure servers. My cousin at the EPA has everything." Thompson's smirk faltered slightly. "You're bluffing." "Am I? Check your phone." The EPA's Criminal Investigation Division should be serving warrants at GRA offices right about now. As if on cue, distant shouts echoed through the tunnel network. Thompson's radio crackled to life. "Sir, we have federal agents at street level. They're showing warrants." The change in Thompson was immediate. The smug confidence vanished, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. "Kill them," he ordered. "Collapse the tunnel. Make it look like an accident during the structural survey." His men reached for weapons, but Rachel moved faster. Her hand found a lever behind the bar, part of the original speakeasy's security system. Ancient machinery groaned to life. The floor beneath Thompson and his men dropped away, revealing a drainage channel that had once been used to dispose of illegal liquor during raids. Their shouts echoed as they fell, splashing into the water below. "Run!" Rachel shouted, already pushing us toward the hidden entrance. We fled through the maintenance shaft, the sounds of chaos echoing behind us. Emergency lights had come on, in the main tunnel, casting everything in a harsh red glow. "Up here!" Emma pointed to another maintenance ladder. "It comes out behind Cedar Street." We climbed as fast as we could, emerging into the cool night air just as sirens began wailing in the distance. Red and blue lights reflected off the buildings, getting closer. David checked his phone. "My cousin says they have enough for multiple federal indictments. Environmental violations, fraud, conspiracy." "Thompson?" I asked. "Trapped in the drainage system," Rachel answered with grim satisfaction. "It empties into a holding tank under the old factory. He'll live, but he'll have some explaining to do when the EPA finds him." Emma leaned against a wall, finally allowing herself to show her exhaustion. They were going to collapse the whole neighborhood. The mining operation would have destabilized the bedrock under hundreds of homes and businesses. They knew it, but the mineral deposits were worth more to them than human lives. Police cars and EPA vehicles were arriving now, agents and officers swarming into the area. David's cousin emerged from one of the federal vehicles, already barking orders into a radio. I looked at my friends, bruised, exhausted, but alive. We had uncovered a conspiracy that stretched across the country, saved a historic neighborhood from destruction, and brought down one of the most powerful corporations in the world. "What happens now?" Rachel asked softly. "Now," I said, watching. As Thompson and his men were led out of the tunnels in handcuffs, we rebuild, we protect what matters, we make sure no one else can ever do this again. The sun was rising over Cedar Street, painting the old buildings in shades of gold and promise. There would be work to do, testimonies to give, a neighborhood to heal. But looking at the determination in my friends' faces, I knew we were ready. For whatever came next, sometimes it takes a crisis to show you what really matters. Sometimes you have to fight to protect not just a building or a business, but the very soul of a community. And sometimes, when you stand together, even the most powerful forces can't tear you down. The federal agents swarmed Cedar Street like ants at a picnic, their vehicles creating an impromptu command center in front of my building. Agent Maria Chen, David's cousin, had commandeered Rachel's coffee shop as a temporary headquarters, spreading documents across the counter where pastries usually sat. "Global resource acquisitions isn't just going to roll over," she warned, sorting through printed copies of the files we'd recovered. "Their lawyers are already crying corporate espionage, claiming the documents were obtained illegally." Emma sat at one of the tables, holding an ice pack to her bruised face. "Let them try. I recorded everything, every meeting, every threat. Thompson didn't just kidnap me, he bragged about their whole operation while they held me." A junior agent approached with a tablet. "Ma'am, we've got movement at GRA's corporate headquarters, private jets being fueled, executives leaving the building with boxes." Maria's expression hardened. "Get me Judge Harrison on the phone. We need seizure warrants before they can destroy more evidence." She turned to me. "Mr. Mitchell, we'll need your formal statement, but first..." The lights went out, not just in the coffee shop. The entire street plunged into darkness. Emergency generators kicked in at the command center, casting everything in an eerie, artificial glow. "That's not a coincidence," Rachel said quietly, moving to check the breaker box. David was already on his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. "The whole grid for this section of the city is down. Someone manually triggered the shutdown from inside the power company's system." Maria grabbed her radio. "All units, secure the perimeter. This is likely a diversionary..." The first explosion cut her off. It came from underground, a deep rumble that shook the foundations of every building on Cedar Street. Coffee cups rattled off tables, windows vibrated in. Their frames and a fine dust sifted down from the ceiling. "They're collapsing the tunnels," Emma realized, horror dawning on her face. Thompson had a fail-safe. More explosions followed, each one closer than the last. Cracks appeared in the sidewalk outside, spreading like spiderwebs across the concrete. "Everyone out!" Maria shouted, already herding people toward the door. The whole street could go. We spilled onto the street just as another explosion rocked the ground. A sinkhole opened in front of the old theater, swallowing a federal vehicle whole. Agents scrambled to move their equipment back as more cracks appeared in the pavement. "The evidence..." I started to turn back, but Rachel grabbed my arm. "It's backed up," she reminded me. "David uploaded everything to secure servers, remember?" But David's face had gone pale in the emergency lights. "Not everything. The original drives from your uncle's safe, they're still inside." Another explosion, closer this time. The front window of the coffee shop shattered, sending glass shards glittering through the air like deadly rain. "No one goes back in," Maria ordered, physically blocking my path. "That building could collapse any..." The ground shifted beneath. Our feet, a grinding sound that seemed to come from the very bones of the earth. Rachel's coffee shop, my uncle's old building, Every structure on Cedar Street groaned as their foundations began to settle into the collapsing tunnel network below. "Secondary charges detected," a voice crackled over Maria's radio. "They're not just collapsing the tunnels, they're bringing down the whole block." I looked at my friends, Emma with her bruised face, Rachel watching her life's work crumble, David clutching his laptop like a shield. We had uncovered the truth, exposed the conspiracy, but GRA had one last card to play. If they couldn't have Cedar Street, they would destroy it. "The basement," Rachel said suddenly. "The speakeasy room. It was reinforced during Prohibition to withstand police. Raids, if the drives are anywhere." "No," Maria cut in, "it's too dangerous. We'll find another way to..." But I was already moving, ducking under the police tape and sprinting toward the coffee shop's side entrance. Behind me, I heard shouts, orders to stop, Emma calling my name. None of it mattered. The door was jammed. I slammed my shoulder against it once, twice, feeling something give way on the third try. Inside, everything was chaos. Shelves had toppled, spilling their contents across the floor. The air was thick with dust and the smell of ruptured gas lines. I found the basement door hanging off its hinges. The emergency lights cast strange shadows as I descended, each step accompanied by the ominous creaking of stressed wood and concrete. The basement office was a disaster. Filing cabinets had tipped over, spilling decades of paperwork across the floor. But the safe was still there, half buried under fallen ceiling tiles. Another explosion rocked the building. Chunks of concrete rained down as support beams groaned in protest. I had minutes, maybe seconds. The safe's electronic keypad was dark, its power cut by the blackout. But Uncle Thomas, ever paranoid, had installed a manual override, a small panel below the keypad, hidden unless you knew where to look. My fingers found the latch, muscle memory from watching him demonstrate it months ago. The panel swung open, revealing a mechanical dial. "Come on," I muttered, spinning the dial. Right to Uncle Thomas's birthday, left to the year he bought the building, right again to... A click. The safe door swung open. The drives were there, along with something else. A leather-bound journal I'd never seen before. I grabbed everything, shoving it into my jacket pockets as the building shuddered around me. "Alex!" Emma's voice from somewhere above. She'd followed me in. "Down here!" Footsteps on the stairs, then Emma appeared in the doorway. "We need to go now. The whole street is starting to..." The ceiling gave way. I lunged forward, tackling Emma as concrete and steel crashed down where she'd been standing. We hit the ground hard, dust and debris raining around us. When the chaos settled, we found ourselves trapped. The stairway had collapsed, sealing off our exit. The only light came from Emma's phone, casting harsh shadows across the devastation. The tunnel. "Entrance," I coughed, pointing to where Rachel's hidden door should be. "If it's not collapsed..." We crawled through the wreckage, every movement bringing down more dust and small debris. The hidden door was partially blocked by fallen shelving, but together we managed to shift enough to squeeze through. The tunnel beyond was somehow still, intact, though ominous creaking suggested that wouldn't last long. We ran, guided by Emma's phone light, as the sound of collapsing masonry chased us through the darkness. "Left," I gasped as we reached a junction. "This branch leads to..." Another explosion, closer than any before. The tunnel floor buckled, throwing us against the wall. Emma's phone went flying, shattering against the bricks and plunging us into total darkness. Water was seeping in now, first a trickle, then a stream. A pipe had burst somewhere above, threatening to flood the remaining tunnel network. "Hold on to me," I said, reaching for Emma in the darkness. Her hand found mine, gripped tight with desperation. We stumbled forward, feeling our way along the tunnel wall. The water was rising, already ankle-deep and climbing. The roar of collapsing infrastructure above was deafening, but beneath it I heard something else, voices shouting. "This way!" Emma pulled me toward the sound. "There's a maintenance shaft that leads to..." The ceiling came down. I felt Emma's hand torn from mine as tons of concrete and earth collapsed between us. The shockwave threw me backward, underwater for a terrifying moment before I found my feet again. "Emma!" No response, just the sound of rushing water and creaking metal. A light appeared above, flashlight beams, searching. A rope ladder, unspooled through a gap in the ceiling. "Mitchell," Maria's voice, "grab the ladder if you can hear me." I sloshed through the rising water, now waist deep. "Emma's on the other side. She's trapped." "We've got her!" David's voice this time. "Other team found her. Now move!" My frozen fingers found the ladder. I climbed, every muscle screaming in protest as the tunnel finally gave way below. The water rushed in, filling the space I'd occupied seconds before. Hands grabbed me, pulling me through the gap onto solid ground. We were in the basement of David's electronics shop, the closest building that hadn't been compromised. Emma was there, soaked and shaking, but alive. Rachel wrapped us both in emergency blankets as Maria coordinated with her teams through static-filled radio. "The whole street's gone," David reported grimly, showing us live footage on his tablet. "Everything from the theater to the bookstore. Just gone." Through the basement window, we could see the devastation. Where Cedar Street's historic buildings had stood for over a century, there was now only a massive sinkhole filled with twisted metal and broken concrete. Fire trucks were arriving, their sirens mixing with the wail of civil defense warnings. "They destroyed everything," Rachel whispered, "just to cover their tracks." I pulled the drives and journal from my jacket, somehow still intact. "Not everything." Maria took them carefully. "This better be worth it. People could have died tonight." "It's worth it," Emma said, her voice hard. "That journal. Your uncle was investigating more than just Cedar Street. GRA's been doing this across the country, targeting historic neighborhoods built over mineral deposits. They've killed people, Maria, made them disappear. What happened here tonight, they've done it before." The ground had stopped shaking, but aftershocks still rippled through the earth, as if the city itself was shuddering at what had been lost. I looked at my friends, battered, soaked, but unbowed. We had survived, and we had proof of Gray's crimes. But as I watched emergency crews securing the massive crater that had once been my neighborhood, I realized this wasn't over. Gras had shown how far they would go to protect their secrets. They had destroyed an entire street rather than face exposure. And somewhere, in their corporate towers, executives were already planning their next move. Maria's phone rang, her supervisor at the EPA. Her expression grew darker as she listened. "GRA's lawyers are already spinning this," she reported after hanging up. "They're claiming eco-terrorists attacked the street, that they're the victims. Their PR machine is in full swing. But the evidence," David started, "is worthless if we can't verify it now that the physical site is destroyed. They collapsed those tunnels for a reason, without the original mineral deposits to prove what they were really after." She didn't need to finish. GRA had sacrificed Cedar Street, but in doing so, they destroyed the primary evidence of their true intentions. It would be our word against their army of lawyers, unless... I opened Uncle Thomas's journal, flipping through pages of meticulous notes. Maps, dates, coordinates, he documented everything. And there, in the final entry, written the day before his death: "If you're reading this, they've already moved on me. But Cedar Street isn't the only site. Everything's documented in the Genesis files. Sarah has the key. Sarah Reynolds, the missing property manager, the person GRA had made disappear first." I looked at Emma, saw the same realization in her eyes. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Somewhere out there, Sarah Reynolds was alive, holding the key to exposing GRA's entire operation. We just had to find her before they did. The sound of helicopters filled the air as news crews arrived, drawn by the destruction of a historic neighborhood. Tomorrow, the headlines would scream about infrastructure failure or terrorist attacks. GRA's PR machine would work overtime to control the narrative. But we knew the truth. And somewhere in Uncle Thomas's journal, in the drives we'd recovered, in the Genesis files waiting to be discovered, we had the power to bring them down. Cedar Street was gone, but its story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. David's electronics shop had become our makeshift command center in the hours following. Cedar Street's destruction, his basement workshop, normally cluttered with circuit boards and computer parts, now resembled a war room. Laptops covered every surface, maps plastered the walls, and coffee cups multiplied like rabbits as we worked through the night. Agent Maria Chen paced between the workstations, phone pressed to her ear. "I don't care what their lawyers say. I want warrants for every GRA executive's personal devices. Yes, I know what time it is. Fine, wake him up." Rachel sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by printouts from Uncle Thomas's journal. Her coffee shop might be gone, but her organizational skills remained razor-sharp. "Look at this, Batten," she said, connecting points on a map. Every property acquisition follows the same geological formations. They're tracking mineral deposits across state lines. Emma, still sporting bruises from her ordeal, worked at David's main computer. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she dug through digital records. Sarah Reynolds didn't just disappear, she was erased. Tax records, social media, professional licenses, all gone within hours of GRA making their move on Cedar Street. I studied the journal entries about Sarah, looking for any clue Uncle Thomas might have left. "The Genesis files," I muttered. He mentions them 3 times, always in connection with Sarah. But what are they? "Found something," David called from his workbench. He'd been analyzing the drives we'd recovered from the safe. Hidden partition, heavily encrypted. File names are all geological terms, but there's one that doesn't fit. Genesis Protocol. We gathered around his screen as he worked to decrypt the file. Lines of code scrolled past, meaningless to everyone except David and Emma. "It's not just a file," Emma breathed. "It's a program, a tracking system." David nodded. GRA's entire operation laid bare. Property acquisitions, geological surveys, shell companies. Sarah didn't just have evidence, she had their playbook. A low whistle escaped Maria's lips. No wonder they made her disappear. "But she's not dead," I insisted. "They would have bragged about it when they had Emma. Used it to scare us. She's alive, and she's hiding somewhere with the complete Genesis files." Rachel held up a page from the journal. "Listen to this. Sarah said, if anything happens, remember where it started. The genesis of everything." It's underlined twice. "Where what started?" Maria asked. "The acquisitions," David suggested. "Their first target?" Emma's hands stilled on the keyboard. "No, where Sarah started. Her first job in real estate." She pulled up property records from 15 years ago. Sarah Reynolds, junior agent at Cornerstone Realty. First major sale, historic warehouse conversion in Millbrook Heights. The name hit me like a thunderbolt. Millbrook Heights. That's where GRA's headquarters is now. They bought up the entire neighborhood. Using the same playbook they tried here, Rachel finished. Sarah would have seen it happen firsthand. Maria was already on her phone. "I need surveillance. Teams in Millbrook Heights focus on abandoned properties especially." A sharp crack split the air. One of David's monitors exploded, showering us with sparks and glass. A bullet hole appeared in the wall behind it. "Down!" Maria shouted, drawing her weapon as more shots punched through the windows. We hit the floor as gunfire raked the workshop. Glass shattered, equipment sparked, and the acrid smell of burning electronics filled the air. "Back room!" David shouted. Over the chaos, there's a reinforced server storage area. We crawled through the debris as bullets continued to rain down. Emma reached the server room first, punching in the security code with shaking fingers. The heavy door swung open just as something metallic clattered through the broken window. "Grenade!" Maria tackled Rachel aside as the device exploded, but instead of shrapnel, thick white smoke began pouring out. Within seconds, the workshop was filled with an impenetrable haze. "Gas masks," David coughed, pulling equipment from a storage cabinet. "Standard security measure for sensitive electronics." We donned the masks as heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs. Dark figures moved through the smoke, visible only as shadows. "Server room now!" Maria pushed us through the door, taking up position beside it. "David, seal it!" David slammed the door and activated emergency protocols. Metal shutters slid down over the small window as reinforced bolts engaged. "How long will that hold?" Emma asked, still coughing despite the mask. "Long enough for the police to respond," Maria replied. I triggered a silent alarm when the shooting started, but the expected sounds of sirens didn't come. Instead, a familiar voice crackled through David's workshop speakers. "Mr. Mitchell." Marcus Thompson, somehow free despite his arrest hours earlier. "I have to admire your persistence, but this can end one of two ways." Rachel checked her phone. "No signal. They're blocking communications." "You can give us the drives and journal," Thompson continued, "or we can breach that room and take them. Your choice." "They're lying," Emma whispered. "They'll kill us either way. We know too much." She was right. Thompson's appearance proved. Gray's influence reached further than we'd imagined. They'd freed him, blocked police response, and trapped us in a basement workshop. This wasn't a negotiation, it was an execution. "David," I whispered, "the server room, what else does it connect to?" "Nothing, it's a..." His eyes widened behind his mask. "Wait, the old maintenance tunnel. We sealed it off years ago, but how long to break through?" "With the tools in here, maybe 10 minutes, but they'll breach the door before then." As if on cue, something heavy slammed against the reinforced door. The metal groaned but held. "We need a distraction," Maria muttered, checking her ammunition. "Something to buy time." Rachel was already moving, gathering server equipment. "These cooling units are filled with pressurized gas. If we overload them, they'll explode," David finished. "But the blast could bring down the whole building." Another impact rattled the door. A seam appeared along one edge. "Better than letting them get the evidence." Emma pulled a USB drive from her pocket. "I made a copy of everything while we were working, if we can get it to Maria's office." The next hit bent the door's frame. We had minutes at most. "David, Rachel, work on the tunnel," Maria ordered. "Emma, help me set up the servers. Alex." I was already examining the journal and drives. "Looking for anything else, Uncle. Thomas might have hidden some other way to find Sarah." We worked frantically as Thompson's team continued their assault on the door. David and Rachel attacked the sealed tunnel entrance with power tools, while Emma and Maria transformed servers into improvised explosives. The journal's pages yielded no new clues, but something about its binding caught my attention. The leather wasn't uniform. One section felt slightly thicker. I carefully separated the layers, revealing a small keycard hidden inside the spine. Faded text was still visible. "Cornerstone Realty." "The genesis of everything," I breathed. "Sarah's first office." Emma looked up from her work. The building would be abandoned now, perfect place to hide. The door buckled inward as something that sounded like a battering ram slammed into it. 2 minutes, David called from the tunnel entrance. They'd broken through the initial seal, but still needed to clear years of debris. Maria positioned the rigged servers near the door. "When I give the signal, everyone moves. The blast should." The door exploded inward. Smoke grenades bounced across the floor as armed figures swarmed through the breach. Maria opened fire, forcing them back momentarily. "Now!" Rachel yanked the final obstacle from the tunnel entrance. "Move!" Emma triggered the server overload and we dove into the tunnel as chaos erupted behind us. The explosion sent a shockwave through the narrow space, showering us with dirt and debris. "Keep moving." Maria brought up the rear, firing back through the smoke. "They'll be right behind us." We ran through the darkness, our way lit only by emergency lights on our gas masks. The tunnel sloped upward, heading toward the river. David gasped. "This branch leads to the old loading docks." Behind us, shouts and gunfire echoed through the tunnel. Thompson's men were in pursuit. "Almost there," Rachel encouraged as the slope increased. "Just a little." She slammed to a halt. Ahead, metal bars blocked the tunnel exit. "No," David moaned. "They must have sealed it when they developed the riverfront." The shouts were getting closer. We were trapped. Then Maria stepped forward, pulling something from her tactical vest. Everyone back. She placed small charges on the bars, just enough plastic explosive to breach the barrier without collapsing the tunnel. The blast was deafening in the confined space. When the smoke cleared, the way ahead was open. We emerged into pre-dawn, light on the riverbank. Above us, the city was waking up, unaware of the drama unfolding beneath its streets. "Split up," Maria ordered. "They can't chase everyone." "Emma, the USB drive." Emma handed it over. "Get it to your office. We'll find Sarah," I finished. "Millbrook Heights, the old Cornerstone building." Maria nodded. "I'll send backup as soon as I can. But Alex," she grabbed my arm, "be careful. Thompson won't stop until he has that journal." Sirens wailed in the distance. Real ones this time. GRA's communication blackout must have ended. "Go," Rachel urged. "David and I will keep them busy, make them think we're all heading west." I looked at my friends, knowing this might be the last time I saw them. "Thank you, all of you." Emma touched my arm. "I'm coming with you. Sarah knows me. She'll trust me." We split up. Just as shouts erupted from the tunnel entrance, David and Rachel ran west along the riverbank, making enough noise to draw attention. Maria disappeared into the growing dawn, the precious USB drive secure in her vest. Emma and I moved quietly in the opposite direction, keeping to the shadows. Behind us, gunfire and explosions marked the start of another battle, but our real mission was just beginning. Somewhere in Millbrook Heights, Sarah Reynolds was hiding with evidence that could bring down an empire. We just had to reach her before Thompson did. The city stretched before us, its streets beginning to fill with early morning traffic. Somewhere in that maze of buildings and memories, answers waited to be found. It was time to discover how it all began. Millbrook Heights rose before us like a concrete graveyard in the early morning light. Where historic brownstones once stood, glass and steel towers now pierced the sky. Only a few original buildings remained, scattered like forgotten tombstones between modern structures. Emma and I moved through side streets, avoiding the main thoroughfares where GRA's security teams would be watching. The old Cornerstone Realty building sat on the neighborhood's eastern edge, a Victorian-era holdout surrounded by construction sites. "Something's wrong," Emma whispered as we approached. "Look at the windows." The building's ancient window panes reflected the sunrise differently than their neighbors. Subtle variations in the glass pattern caught the light. "Security film," I realized. "High-end stuff. Someone's been upgrading this place." We circled the property carefully. Unlike the abandoned buildings around it, this one showed signs of maintenance. New locks on the service entrance, fresh mortar in the foundation, a modern HVAC unit concealed behind vintage screening. "Sarah's been busy," Emma murmured. Question is, how do we get in without announcing ourselves to Thompson's people? The key card from Uncle Thomas's journal felt heavy in my pocket, but using the front entrance was asking for trouble. A rhythmic thumping drew our attention upward. A news helicopter circled downtown, covering the destruction of Cedar Street. More would follow as the story spread. "Fire escape," I pointed to a metal structure partially hidden by morning shadows. Service access to the upper floors. Emma studied the rusted framework. It's retracted. We'd need to trigger the release mechanism. Or, I gestured, to a dumpster positioned beneath the lowest platform. We could improvise. The dumpster's lid was sturdy enough to hold our weight. Emma went first, her years of rock climbing experience showing as she scaled the brick wall to reach the fire escape. I followed less gracefully, muscles protesting after the night's adventures. The fifth-floor window had been left slightly open, an invitation or a trap. Emma pulled a compact mirror from her pocket, using it to check the room beyond. "Clear," she whispered, "but there's light coming from somewhere inside." We slipped through the window into what had once been a storage room. Filing cabinets lined the walls, their drawers hanging open and empty, but the layer of dust was wrong. Too even, too perfect. "It's fake." Emma moved closer to a cabinet. "Look at the hinges. These have been recently oiled." A soft humming emanated from behind the cabinets. Electronics of some kind, working hard enough to generate heat. "Sarah's got a server farm running," Emma continued, "probably analyzing the Genesis files, tracking GRA's movements." The door to the main office space was ajar. Golden morning light spilled through tall windows, illuminating decades-old furniture arranged like a museum display. Everything perfectly preserved, untouched. "Down!" Emma tackled me as something whizzed past where my head had been. A knife quivered in the doorframe, its blade gleaming with wicked promise. "That's far enough." A woman's voice, calm and precise. "The next one won't miss." Sarah Reynolds stepped into view, another throwing knife held ready. She looked different from her professional photos. Harder, more dangerous. Her business suit had been replaced by tactical gear, her manicured appearance swapped for operational efficiency. "Ms. Reynolds," I started to rise, but her grip on the knife tightened. "How did you find this place?" Her eyes never stopped moving, checking angles, assessing threats. Emma spoke from her position on the floor. "Uncle Thomas's journal. He left us a message about the genesis of everything." Something flickered in Sarah's expression. "Thomas sent you? Prove it." I slowly reached for the key card, moving with exaggerated care. "He hid this in the journal's binding, your old Cornerstone Realty ID." Sarah's stance shifted slightly. "Show me the journal." I produced it carefully. She gestured for me to slide it across the floor. The moment she saw Uncle Thomas's handwriting, her demeanor changed. The knife lowered fractionally. "You're Alex Mitchell," she said, "Thomas's nephew, and Emma Roberts, the lawyer who's been investigating GRA." "We need your help," I said, slowly standing. "GRA destroyed Cedar Street. They're erasing evidence, killing people." "I know." Sarah moved to a computer terminal, partially hidden behind a privacy screen. "I've been tracking their operations for months. Cedar Street was just the latest in a pattern stretching back decades." Emma joined me, rubbing her shoulder where she'd hit the floor. "The Genesis files, you have them?" Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard. Screens lit up around the room, revealing a command center concealed behind the abandoned office facade. "The Genesis files are more than documents," she explained. "They're a targeting algorithm. GRA uses geological survey data to identify mineral deposits, then overlays property values, historical preservation status, local political connections. Everything they need to plan their acquisitions." Maps appeared on the screens, showing hundreds of potential targets across the country, historic neighborhoods, cultural landmarks, communities marked for destruction. "My God," Emma breathed. "They're planning simultaneous operations in dozens of cities. Why do you think they're so desperate to find me?" Sarah's smile was grim. "I'm not just hiding evidence of past crimes. I'm predicting their future ones." An alert flashed on one of the screens. Sarah's expression hardened. "Speaking of which," Do we have company? GRA security teams just entered the building. She pressed a button and metal shutters slid down over the windows. Security monitors showed armed men moving through the lobby, led by a familiar figure. "Thompson," I growled. "How did he find us?" "He didn't," Sarah replied, activating more security systems. "This is their regular sweep. GRA's new headquarters was built here for a reason. The mineral deposits extend under half the neighborhood. They monitor all the old buildings, making sure no one gets curious about what's underneath." Emma moved to the monitors. "How many?" "2 teams. 8 men each. Standard pattern is to clear the building floor by floor. We have maybe 10 minutes. We need to get you and the Genesis files out," I said, "with Maria's evidence and your data." "It's not that simple." Sarah pulled up another screen, showing what looked like engineering diagrams. "The files are just part of it. I found something much worse in their system. Project Echo isn't just about mining rare earth elements. They're preparing for something bigger." The diagram showed massive underground structures extending far beneath the city streets. "What are we looking at?" Emma asked. "Bunkers. Preliminary. Construction has already started. GRA is using the mining operations as cover to build a network of hardened facilities. They know something's coming, something bad enough that their executives want bolt holes ready." The implications hit like a physical blow. This wasn't just about greed or mineral rights. GRA was preparing for some kind of catastrophe, using their resource extraction operations to hide the construction of survival bunkers for the wealthy and powerful. That's why they need specific properties, I realized. It's not just about what's underneath. They need total control of the surface access points. Sarah nodded. "And they're not alone. Other corporations, private military contractors, government agencies, they're all quietly preparing. The Genesis files expose the whole network." The security feed showed Thompson's men reaching the 3rd floor. Armed figures moved with practiced efficiency, sweeping each room. "We're running out of time," Emma warned. Sarah was already moving, grabbing hard drives and activating deletion protocols on her servers. "The primary files are backed up off-site, but we need to take the latest data. The targeting algorithms identified 3 more neighborhoods slated for acquisition this month." "How are we getting out?" I asked. "They'll have the fire escape covered." A slight smile crossed Sarah's face. Thomas wasn't the only one who appreciated old buildings. Cornerstone Realty had some interesting clients during Prohibition. She pressed a hidden panel and a section of flooring slid away, revealing a narrow shaft with ancient iron rungs set into the brick. "Smuggler's Tunnel," she explained. "Runs to the river just like the ones under Cedar Street. GRA hasn't found this one yet." The security monitors showed Thompson's teams reaching the 4th floor. Their methodical search pattern had become more focused. They must have spotted something. "Go!" Sarah ordered, handing Emma a waterproof case containing hard drives. "I'll wipe the systems and follow." "Like hell," I replied. "We're not leaving you." "This isn't a debate. The Genesis files are more important than any of us. If Thompson gets his hands on that case, thousands of people will die. Entire communities will be destroyed. You need to." The stairwell door exploded inward. Sarah moved with blinding speed, throwing a knife even as she dove for cover. Her aim was true. One of Thompson's men went down clutching his shoulder. Emma and I scrambled behind overturned desks as gunfire filled the room. Sarah's security shutters deflected most of the bullets, but the impacts were deafening in the confined space. "The tunnel!" Sarah shouted over the chaos. "Go!" She produced a compact submachine gun from somewhere and laid down, covering fire. Forcing Thompson's men back momentarily, Emma grabbed my arm. "She's right. We have to protect the files." Everything in me rebelled against leaving Sarah to face Thompson alone. but she was already moving to a different position, her actions showing years of tactical training. This wasn't a real estate agent caught up in corporate crime. This was someone who had prepared for exactly this kind of fight. 1 minute, Sarah called. Then I'm collapsing the tunnel entrance. Move! Emma and I rushed to the opening. The shaft was narrow but navigable, the iron rungs slick with age. Ready? Emma asked, securing the waterproof case to her belt. Before I could answer, Sarah's voice cut through the gunfire. Thompson, still doing wet work for corporate masters, I thought you had higher ambitions. Thompson's response was, and cold. Everyone serves someone, Sarah, even you. The difference is, I chose my side. More shooting, punctuated by the distinctive sound of Sarah's throwing knives, finding targets. Emma tugged my arm. We have to go, now. She was right. Sarah was buying us time, and every second we hesitated put her sacrifice at risk. We began our descent into darkness as the battle raged above. The tunnel entrance grew more distant with each step, the sounds of combat becoming muffled. A final explosion shook the shaft, followed by the unmistakable rumble of collapsing masonry. Sarah had sealed the tunnel entrance, trapping herself with Thompson's team. Keep moving, Emma whispered, though her voice cracked slightly. We have two. A scream echoed down the shaft, abruptly cut short. We climbed faster, trying to outdistance the sounds of violence above. The tunnel seemed endless, each rung bringing new aches to exhausted muscles. Finally, mercifully, we reached the bottom. The tunnel opened into a larger space, some kind of underground junction point. Ancient brick archways led off in different directions, their destinations lost to time. Which way? Emma asked, her flashlight beam dancing across weathered, directional markers. I studied the faded signs. There, that one points to River Landing 3, should take us near the old ferry terminal. We moved as quickly as we dared through the time-forgotten tunnel. The air grew thicker as we approached the river, heavy with moisture and decay. Emma checked the waterproof case for the dozenth time. The Genesis files. All those neighborhoods, marked for destruction. We have to warn them. We will. I tried to project more confidence than I felt. Maria has the USB drive. We have Sarah's data. Once we expose Project Echo... A sound echoed through the tunnel behind us. Boots on ancient brick. They found another entrance, Emma breathed. We broke into a run, no longer worried about stealth. The tunnel floor was treacherous, slick with seepage from the river above, but fear drove us forward. Light appeared ahead, grey morning sunshine filtering through a grating, the ferry terminal's old maintenance access. But as we approached, voices became audible from above. More of Thompson's men already in position. We were trapped between two forces with nowhere left to run. The sounds behind us grew closer. Soon Thompson's team would have us in a crossfire. Emma clutched the waterproof case containing humanity's best chance at exposing GRA's plans. The time had come to decide, fight or surrender. Either way, the next few minutes would determine not just our fate, but the fate of countless communities marked for destruction. Sarah had given her life to protect this information. The question was, what would we give to ensure her sacrifice wasn't in vain? The tunnel echoed with approaching footsteps from both directions. Emma and I pressed ourselves against the damp brick wall, minds racing for a solution. The waterproof case containing the Genesis files felt impossibly heavy against her hip. The grating, I whispered, pointing upward. If we can reach it? Emma studied the ancient metal barrier between us and freedom. They'll have men watching topside. Better than being caught in a crossfire down here. The footsteps grew closer. Any moment now, Thompson's teams would have us in their sights. Emma handed me the case and interlaced her fingers, creating a step. I'll boost you up. Once you're through, help me. A new sound cut through the tunnel. a distant rumble that grew rapidly closer. The brick walls began to vibrate. "Get down!" I tackled Emma as debris rained from the ceiling. The rumbling intensified, accompanied by the unmistakable roar of falling water. The tunnel junction exploded in chaos as a wall of water crashed through one of the archways. Thompson's men, caught in the open, were swept away like leaves in a storm. "The river gate!" Emma shouted over the deluge. "Someone opened the flood control system!" We clung to a maintenance ladder as the water level rose, threatening to pull us into its deadly current. Through the chaos, a familiar voice echoed from above. "Alex! Emma, grab the rope!" Rachel's face appeared at the grating, silhouetted against the morning sky. A thick rope snaked down through the bars. We didn't hesitate. Emma went first, climbing with desperate strength as the water churned below. I followed, the waterproof case secured across my chest. Hands grabbed us, pulling us through the grating onto solid ground. David and Rachel were there, along with Maria and a team of EPA agents in tactical gear. "Sarah?" Maria asked, helping us to our feet. I shook my head, her expression hardened. "Thompson's team was right behind us," Emma gasped, still catching her breath. "How did you—" "Sarah," Rachel explained. "She contacted me an hour ago, gave me the codes to access the flood control system, said we'd know when to use it." The sound of helicopters filled the air. Not news crews this time, but federal agents. The morning sky was full of them, descending on Millbrook Heights like avenging angels. "The Genesis files exposed everything," Maria said, gesturing, "for her team to secure the area. Not just GRA's operations, but their entire network. Politicians, judges, corporate executives. Sarah had dirt on all of them. While you were keeping Thompson busy, we moved on multiple locations simultaneously." David's laptop showed live feeds from across the city. Federal agents raiding offices, executives in handcuffs, documents being seized. "What about the bunkers?" I asked. "Project Echo?" "Already being investigated by 3 different agencies. Turns out building unauthorized underground structures in major urban areas is frowned upon by Homeland Security." Emma clutched the waterproof case. "We need to get this somewhere safe. Sarah's latest data will be crucial evidence." A new voice finished. We turned to find Sarah Reynolds walking toward us, very much alive despite the battle we'd heard. Her tactical gear was scorched and bloodied, but her eyes burned with triumph. "Sarah!" Emma moved to embrace her, then stopped short at Maria's warning gesture. Sarah smiled slightly. "It's okay." She held up her hands, showing the standard-issue FBI credentials clipped to her vest. "I've been undercover in GRA's organization for 3 years. The real Sarah Reynolds is enjoying early retirement in witness protection." The pieces clicked into place. Her combat training, her access to classified information, her ability to predict GRA's moves. "Thomas knew," I realized. "That's why he trusted you with everything." She nodded. "Your uncle was a good man. When he discovered what GRA was planning, he could have taken their money and walked away. Instead, he helped us gather evidence, set up secure communications, monitor their activities. His death wasn't an accident, but he died protecting something greater than himself." The morning sun had fully risen now, painting the city in shades of gold and promise. Below us, the floodwaters continued to churn through the tunnel network, washing away decades of secrets. "Thompson?" Emma asked. "In custody," Maria reported, checking her phone. "Along with most of GRA's executive board, the company's stock is in freefall as the indictments become public." David's laptop chimed with incoming news alerts. The story was breaking across multiple networks: corporate corruption, environmental crimes, conspiracy, murder. Cedar Street's destruction had been the final straw, the catalyst that brought everything into the light. Sarah opened the waterproof case, connecting one of the hard drives to a secure tablet. The Genesis files aren't just evidence of past crimes. They're a roadmap to preventing future ones. Every vulnerable community, every potential target, we can protect them now. Rachel studied the maps on the tablet screen. All those neighborhoods, all those lives they were willing to destroy. Not anymore, Maria said firmly. We've frozen their assets, seized their equipment. Project Echo is dead. The implications were still sinking in. Hundreds of historic communities saved, thousands of lives protected, a conspiracy spanning decades finally exposed. But the cost had been high. Cedar Street lay in ruins, its century-old. Buildings reduced to rubble. The neighborhood's heart had been torn out, its community scattered. As if reading my thoughts, Rachel spoke up. We're not done. Cedar Street isn't just buildings, it's people, and we're still here. She pulled out her phone, showing an email chain between the displaced business owners. Plans for rebuilding, for supporting each other, for coming back stronger. Your uncle believed in the power of community, Sarah said quietly. That's what GRA never understood. They saw properties and profits. He saw people and possibilities. Emma was already making calls, coordinating with legal aid organizations to help displaced residents. David pulled up architectural plans, discussing restoration techniques with Rachel. What happens now? I asked Maria. She gestured to the federal team securing the area. Now we make sure this never happens again. New regulations, stricter oversight, real consequences for corporate criminals who think they're above the law. The burner phone in my pocket buzzed one last time. A text from an unknown number. Check your uncle's journal. Last page. I opened the weathered book, finding a hidden pocket in the back cover. Inside was a single key and a handwritten note. For Alex, because sometimes you have to tear something down to build it back better. The future of Cedar Street is in your hands. Make it count. Uncle Thomas. The key was old, its brass surface worn smooth by time. But I recognized the distinctive pattern. It matched the vintage locks on several Cedar Street buildings. Understanding dawned. Uncle Thomas hadn't just left me a building, he'd left me a mission. Sarah noticed my expression. He knew, knew that someone would have to rebuild, to restore what was lost. He chose you for a reason. The morning breeze carried the sounds of the city coming alive. Emergency crews were still working at Cedar Street, but soon the demolition teams would arrive, clearing the way for whatever came next. We'll help, Rachel said firmly. All of us. Cedar Street deserves a second chance. Emma was already making notes on her tablet. I know some preservation experts who specialize in historic reconstruction, and with GRA's assets frozen, we might be able to claim compensation for the damage. One step at a time, Maria cautioned. First, we need to make sure all the evidence is secure, all the witnesses are protected. And all the stories are told, David added, his camera capturing the sunrise over our wounded but undefeated city. Sarah checked her secure phone. FBI teams just found GRA's backup servers. Everything they tried to hide, every crime they thought they'd buried. It's all coming out now. The helicopters were landing, bringing more federal agents and evidence response teams. The investigation was only beginning, but the tide had turned. Thompson and his corporate masters had tried to erase a community's history. Instead, they'd become a cautionary tale about the power of ordinary people standing together against corruption. I looked at my friends, Rachel with her unwavering determination, Emma's fierce intelligence, David's quiet strength, Sarah's calculated courage. We'd started as neighbors and become something more. The key in my hand felt warm, alive with possibility. Uncle Thomas had believed in Cedar Street's future enough to die protecting it. Now it was our turn to prove him right. So, Rachel said, a slight smile playing at her lips. When do we start? The answer was written in the determination on every face, in the plans already forming, in the strength of a community that refused to be erased. We'd start now, today, together. Because sometimes the most powerful force in the world isn't money, or influence, or corporate might. Sometimes it's simply people who refuse to let their stories be silenced, their homes be destroyed, their communities be forgotten. The sun climbed higher, promise breaking across the city like dawn. Cedar Street had fallen, but its spirit remained undefeated, and from its ashes, something new would rise, something built on truth, justice, and the unshakable power of ordinary people standing together. Thompson had tried to block me from entering my property that morning, never knowing he was starting a chain of events that would bring down an empire. But that's the thing about empires built on lies and corruption. They never see the truth coming until it's too late. The future beckoned, full of challenges and possibilities. We were ready. After all, the best stories don't end with destruction. They end with rebirth, and Cedar Street's story was just beginning. Up next, here are two more incredible tales you won't want to miss.